back to my channel. So in today's video I would like to carry on from the video last week when I talked about metaphors, and in today's video I'd like to touch upon recursion, again using this article here from the Philosophy Now magazine, recursion, humanity, metaphor and the recursive mind, in Philosophy Now magazine as my little guide. So recursion was another concept discussed in a Philosophy Now article. Recursion means to bracket or parcel up a number of entities together, resulting in a generalisation. For example, the use of the word cousin in place of aunt's daughter. Ideas are simplified in order to develop more complex thoughts. In other words are used like containers to denote not just simple ideas, but complex sets of ideas, or loading complex ideas into simple verbal units. Recursion is also called nesting, as ideas are contained one inside another. The idea of classifying things and abstract ideas such as hope or equality is a product of the ability to box up a set of ideas into just one idea, a bit like a linguistic Russian doll. I think that many autistics might not use recursion as much as non-autistics, because we tend to think sequentially, focusing in on each detail instead of a general recursive picture. This can also affect our ability to understand metaphor and stereotypes. Stereotypes rest upon the ability to lump many things together in order to simplify and better understand reality, whereas autistics tend to find simplification difficult because there is a tendency to absorb every single particular detail. Speaking personally, I am generally hypercritical of generalisations and any form of tribalism, because I feel that important individual truths are being ignored in the name of standardised dogma. However, I am aware some autistics do generalise and form stereotypes themselves, so it is not the case that autistics by definition can't be recursive. Obviously it depends, on the type of autism and on the individual. But I speculate that at least some of us may well be less recursive, on average, than non-autistics, and so possibly less likely to form negative stereotypes. Speaking very recursively, or generally, we might be less prone to prejudice and less prone to peer pressure, as many autistics are very individual and non-judgmental. Struggling to be recursive could therefore have a positive side, although it can put us at a disadvantage when we are asked to look at the big picture or to make a generalisation that might help us to avoid getting overwhelmed by detail. An area where recursion is widely employed is mathematics. People understand larger numbers by thinking of them as combinations of smaller units. People cannot think of larger numbers without language or signs. For example, the signs used in maths are a form of language. Now, I really struggle with number and maths, and it might be that problems with recursion are at least partly behind this difficulty. The smaller numbers, such as 1, 2, 3, are more concrete, and as such are easier to conceptualise without signs. But larger numbers require the use of a sign that holds within it a more complex number. So maths relies upon generalisation and categorisation, something that some autistics might struggle with because we tend to be detail-focused, concrete thinkers. But of course we're all different, and some autistics excel at maths and number, yet might struggle with recursion in other areas. So let me know what you think about what I've said in a box below. Both metaphor and recursion rely on the ability to move beyond concrete, physical, everyday reality. They enable people not to get overwhelmed by detail and to think in abstract, complex ways. People do this by parcelling up ideas into simpler units, recursion, or using physical reality to inform more complex experiences via metaphor. Autistics can struggle with both aspects of abstract thought. Although, as I mentioned in my previous video, we can develop our own idiosyncratic ways of making sense of the world, such as our own metaphors. Now, personally, I reckon that generally, autistics possibly can kind of compensate for their difficulties with metaphor. Metaphors can be learnt intellectually via books. So if you do struggle with metaphors, it is possible to learn them by book reading, and then over time you can then sort of become better at metaphors, at least the ones that you have learnt. And that's certainly been the case for me, but obviously it depends on your type of autism, and this would only be possible if you have a high verbal IQ to begin with. But I think that recursion, maybe, is harder for autistics to learn, because it's, recursion is something that can't be learnt academically in a way that metaphors can. And so I think there are different types of literality in autism. So while I'm not as literal as I used to be when it comes to metaphors, I still do sometimes take them literally, the ones I haven't heard of before, but I'm a lot less literal than I used to be, simply because over time, I've managed to learn quite a number of them through book knowledge. Where I do tend to take things literally is more things like sarcasm, irony, any form of generalisation I tend to find difficult. That's where I tend more to struggle, because you can't really intellectually learn about. I mean, I understand the concept of irony. That took me a long time to learn, but I do now understand the concept of irony, and I can be ironic myself, but I struggle to understand, to pick up another person's irony, because irony could take so many different shapes and forms. You can't go to a book, like with a book you can go and learn a metaphor, you can then consign it to your memory, so again, next time you hear it, you think, oh yeah, I recognise this one, no longer take it literally, problem solved. But you can't do that with irony and some of these other ways, these other non-verbal kind of ways, how can I put it, things like irony, sarcasm and things like that, you can't go away and learn about so readily in a book. You can learn what irony is, but that's not going to help you when it comes to it in real life, because there are so many different ways in which irony, someone can be ironic, yet you can't pick it up in a book. So I think that's where, I guess, the sort of more higher order abstractions is where autistics, even autistics who become a lot better at understanding metaphor, that's where I'm still going to be tripped up, and I still get tripped up by those more by the forms of non-verbal communication, I guess, that you can't learn from books. Anyway, I digress. But I hope you found this video interesting, and do let me know your own thoughts about recursion in a box below. So I'm now going to be moving on now to video number 2, where I'm going to be showing you another old camp diary. So moving on to video number 2 now.